Okay, as I talked about at the top of the program, with the CARES Act through Congress and more relief plans to follow, banks are concerned about the launch of this small business lending program. And there were some complications through the SBA with churches. Been working on this. People have been working on this through actually through the weekend up until today. It is to launch tomorrow. How will it work? Will it work? And, well, here to answer those questions is Oklahoma Senator James Lankford. Senator, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Absolutely glad to be back with you again, Tony.
Before we jump into the CARES Act and the small business provisions, the Paycheck Protection Program, I want to talk about the oil business because people see this. I mean, a lot of people happy. They got oil prices down to, back home in Louisiana, it was like $1.45. Hadn't seen those numbers in a long time. But there's something bigger at play here. Tell our listeners what's happening.
There's something very significant in play here. You go back to January when China put 700 million people in quarantine. Suddenly we had a tremendous oversupply of oil and gas across the entire world because of that. Russia especially saw this as a moment to go seize new energy markets, and so they started producing more. Saudi Arabia retaliated by also producing more, and that started an oversupply in a world that already didn't need as much. Now between Russia and Saudi Arabia then competing with each other made a bad situation worse. And so until they decide to stop overproducing and until our economy restarts again, we're going to have a massive oversupply of oil in the world. Right now we have about 20% more oil than what we need in the world right now because there's so little driving here. And so this will be a big issue for a while. It's an issue that I was just actually visiting with Saudi leadership just a few minutes ago on this. We visited multiple times over the past several weeks trying to be able to get them to be a responsible player in energy in the world market. But also it's the bad actor typically always ends up being Russia and their overreaction and their opportunistic self. And so if there's a crisis, they want to try to run into it and suddenly steal players from it.
But, Senator, is there some ulterior motives here with the U.S. under this administration with deregulation, the shale oil production, which is a bit costly? We've been producing, in fact, exporting oil. Is there an underlying effort here to try to curtail U.S. production because it is costly in its exploration and in its refinement?
No question. Oil is much cheaper to produce in the Middle East because it's still doing traditional drilling, poke a straw into the earth and pull it out. Drilling is more complicated in the United States, but though it costs a little more to be able to do that, our independence is really important to us. We just learned very easily from watching all the coronavirus pain of all the suppliers from China not being able to supply protective equipment for our hospitals that's produced there. And we've learned it's very important that our manufacturing for essential items is made here in the United States. So again, get cut off. Energy is one of those essential things. We are energy independent, and it's very important that we stay that way. And the rest of the world doesn't want us to be energy independent. They want us to be dependent on them. But we've got to continue to be able to stand up against that and to say energy independence protects our future and protects the opportunity for us to be able to make decisions independent of what other actors want to do.
Yeah, it's extremely important from a national security standpoint as well that we're not dependent upon those that do not have our best interest at heart. What do you see as the way forward here? Because if this excess oil remains for a long period of time, that's going to drive a lot of our production out of business. How do we maintain that? What's the way to stabilize our domestic production?
So several things need to be done here. One of them is the Payroll Protection Program, which I know that you had mentioned you want to be able to talk about as well. That program also applies to energy companies the same as it does to anyone else. If you're a company, 500 people or less, and everyone, when they think about oil companies, they think about big groups like Exxon and Chevron. The vast majority of energy companies are very small mom-and-pop trucking companies, drilling companies, service companies. These are very small entities on the whole, but they're exceptionally important to our economy. Those companies can also get all of this payroll protection program, and it provides them 2 months to be able to help ride through the hard part of this storm. The president also has been very clear that he wants to be able to fill up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I've encouraged that. I think that's a good thing to do. That buys up a couple of days. It doesn't solve the problem long term, but it does help us in the short term to be able to help balance the price out somewhat. But we're going to have to continue to be able to make sure we're doing practical things to be able to help these companies stay alive, because if they all die out, then we don't just lose the company. You can't just turn that back on. You lose the expertise of how to be able to actually do the drilling in a clean, effective way. And if you lose that and have to start that all over again, we lose the opportunity for independence for us long term.
You know, it's quite amazing. Just thinking about that, when I was in high school, I worked in the oil field in Oklahoma, where I went to high school, and where we see in such a short period of time, this president brought us to a point of energy independence, which is critical in so many fronts. But we see that now in jeopardy. We saw the president who helped, through deregulation, get our economy going, lowest unemployment in record history. I mean, it's just phenomenal. That's all been pretty much eliminated with something that was out of everyone's control, this coronavirus that has swept the globe. It just brings it back, and I know you and I have had these conversations in the times we've spent together, but this just tells us how we are dependent, really, not on our own ability, as good as and as innovative as we can be, but boy, do we need the hand of God upon this nation.
I remind people all the time, especially a lot lately, that the Jews, when they were marching into Jerusalem, they always sang the same song when they would come into Jerusalem. They would sing Psalm 121. It's called the Song of Ascent. And in that group of songs, they sing right in the middle of it, Psalm 121, they would sing as they come up the hill into Jerusalem, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And I think it's especially telling that as they're marching into their capital city, the seat of government for them, they're singing the song, my help does not come from the seat of government. My help comes from the Lord. That was their reminder as they came up the hill every time. And I think it's a good reminder for us as well. That ultimately God is the helper. He's the one that doesn't sleep or slumber. And in the middle of all that we see going on, there really is a God that's at work doing some remarkable thing in the middle of all the pain that's also being experienced in the world right now.
And we need to keep that before us and looking even beyond government, looking to God, who will often use government because he has ordained government. But ultimately, we have to see him as our source, our provider, our protector. I want to shift for just a moment. You mentioned the relief. I mean, I mentioned it, and you tied it into the oil. How is this going to play out? Tomorrow morning is when the SBA, the small business loans, roll out. This thing was rushed through. There were some complications. Where does that stand? Is it ready for prime time?
Oh, it's not ready for prime time, but it's going to be launched anyway. So tomorrow morning, banks and credit unions around the country will offer a new program called Payroll Protection Program. This was literally signed into law by the president 6 days ago. So from something being signed into law to something being implemented that affects every small business, every faith-based nonprofit, every nonprofit in America in 6 days, lightning speed in government speak. So it's very fast. That means the rollout's going to be really bumpy. There are going to be some banks that are going to say, I don't know how to do this yet in the morning, because all the rules will come to them in the morning. So for small businesses and churches and nonprofits, when they contact bankers in the morning, they're going to be reading documents, trying to figure out how to be able to do this. And then once they figure it out, then they'll start extending this out to folks. So expect a bumpy start in the morning, because a lot of people are interested in this. This is a program that pays the salary of every employee of every small business in America. Instead of those folks ending up on unemployment lines, the goal was for those individuals to be able to stay in their job, so when we get on the other side of this virus in the months ahead, we'll still have those companies and those employees still together, and so we can restart our economy again. If everybody ends up on unemployment and you're having to go chase down and find new employees and try to restart it, this will be much, much slower. So this was a faster way to do it. But it also, for the first time ever, includes churches and faith-based nonprofits. Typically in small business loans or any kind of program with Small Business Administration, churches and nonprofits are excluded from those. They can't participate in it. But this one's different. They can participate in it and will be able to go through it. But none of the banks, none of the entities have seen the regulations on that until tomorrow morning when they're released. And then when they're released, they'll be told as soon as you're ready and you've read through all of it, get started.
And Senator Lankford, I know there were some issues because we've been working on the fact with your team and others on this, and there were some, not in the legislation but in regulations that were pre-existing, some concerns that faith groups might have to be in that this participating in this program might be in conflict with their statement of faith and what they believe. But it now appears that that's been resolved.
That has been resolved. We want to make very clear. The churches, whether they're independent churches or denominational churches, they can participate in this event. They can participate in this program because they're an employer. Our main goal in Congress, and what I had pushed for in this bill itself, because I was a part of pushing this section of it, was to make sure we were not discriminating against people because they had faith. Previously in small business programs, they had said, I'm sorry, if you're a person of faith, you're not welcome here. You can't participate in this program. We want to be very clear to the Small Business Administration and to every employer in America, whether a faith-based employer or a non-faith-based employer, that those employers are employers to the government, and the government should be neutral to all of those folks and not care about the content of it. So as I've jokingly said, we treat Baptists and bars the exact same way in this. They're both employers, and we're taking care of stabilizing the employment for those folks. So that was a key aspect for us in the beginning. We've continued to work behind the scenes all weekend long with Treasury and with the White House and the Small Business Administration, working all the way through even today to be able to work to be able to make sure this actually gets launched. Churches are able to participate in it because they are desperately hurting, the same as restaurants and hotels are.
All right, Baptist and bars. I wonder which one's sober. All right, Senator Lankford, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tony. Glad to be able to be with you.
All right, always great to talk with you. Well, that rolls out tomorrow morning. We're going to actually be talking more about that because it is a way, really, it's amazing that in 6 days, as the senator pointed out, they were able to get this thing up and running. I don't know that government's ever moved that fast. And it's designed to get an infusion of capital into the economy quickly. It's sputtering, with what's happened. It keeps it running. And once we're through on the other side of this virus, it will help us get the economy up and going again.